strike a wooden match against a box. It is a trivial, everyday action we perform without a second thought. Yet, in the Victorian era, this tiny stick of convenience acted as a slow-ticking time bomb. It did not merely burn wood, it devoured human bone from the inside out. Today, we expose the everyday object that caused faces to rot and jaws to glow green in the dark, a horrific industrial plague born entirely from the world's desperate demand for instant fire. Welcome to Strange Object History, where we investigate the strange and sometimes terrifying origins of everyday objects. Subscribe and click the bell so you never miss a discovery. Before the 1830s, creating fire was an exhausting chore involving flint, steel and tinder. Then came the Lucifer friction match, a revolutionary invention that promised instant light with a single, satisfying strike. It transformed daily life, banishing the gloom of winter nights. However, the chemical that made this magic possible was white phosphorus, a substance so volatile and toxic that it was essentially a solid poison. This was the deadly price of progress. To satisfy the global hunger for these fire sticks, massive factories erupted across Europe and America. These were not the sanitized assembly lines of today, but cramped, unventilated death traps. The air inside hung thick with a white, choking vapor that tasted of garlic. Workers spent 12 to 14 hours a day, hunched over steaming vats, dipping millions of wooden splinters into a hot phosphorus slurry, inhaling the lethal fumes with every single breath they took. The workforce consisted almost exclusively of impoverished young women and girls, some as young as 6. Their small, nimble fingers were deemed perfect for the delicate task of boxing thousands of matches per hour. These match girls were the lowest of the low, working barefoot on floors covered in phosphorus dust. With no break rooms, they ate their meager meals of bread and tea at their workstations, transferring the poison from their stained fingers directly into their mouths. White phosphorus is an insidious killer. In the hot, humid air of the dipping rooms, the fumes didn't just damage the lungs, they sought a specific entry point. The real danger arose if a worker had even a minor dental issue. Gum disease and cavities were rampant among the Victorian poor, providing an open highway for the phosphorus fumes to bypass the body's defences and burrow directly into the porous, spongy bone of the jaw, where it began to accumulate. The nightmare typically began with a seemingly innocent toothache that refused to subside. Workers would visit a local tooth puller, hoping for relief, but the extraction site would fail to heal. Instead of closing up, the empty socket would begin to seep a foul-smelling discharge. This was the first terrifying sign that the jawbone itself was dying inside the living flesh. The pain was described as maddening, a constant throbbing agony that no laudanum could soothe. As the condition advanced, the soft tissue of the gums would recede and peel away, exposing the dead, grey bone beneath. This was Phossy Jaw. The smell of rotting bone emanating from the victim's mouth was so putrid and nauseating that their own families often could not bear to be in the same room. The victim was forced into isolation, wrapping scarves around their face to hide the decay and contain the stench, suffering alone as their face slowly collapsed. The body, in a desperate attempt to expel the dead material, would form massive abscesses along the jawline. These swellings would eventually burst, creating permanent fistulas, holes in the cheek or neck through which toxic pus would drain constantly. Victims were left severely disfigured, unable to chew solid food. They slowly wasted away from malnutrition, trapped in a cycle of agony where the only release was the total removal of the jaw or death itself. Perhaps the most psychologically terrifying symptom was the luminescence. Phosphorus translates to light bearer because it glows when reacting with oxygen. Since the workers' jawbones were saturated with the chemical, the exposed, dying bone in their mouths would emit a faint, ghostly green-white light. Imagine the sheer horror of waking up in a pitch-black room, looking in a mirror, and seeing your own skull glowing through your rotting gums. Once Phossy Jaw set in, there was absolutely no cure. The only medical intervention available to stop the necrosis from spreading to the brain was the surgical removal of the affected bone. In an era before reliable antibiotics or advanced reconstruction, surgeons would slice open the face and saw out the entire lower or upper jaw. Survivors were left permanently disfigured, their faces caved in, condemned to a life of eating liquid mash and hiding from society. The factory owners, who were profiting immensely from the match trade, initially denied any connection between the fumes and the disease. They callously blamed the workers for bad hygiene or loose morals. To avoid liability, foremen would inspect workers' teeth and immediately fire anyone showing the early signs of gum soreness. They cast these women out onto the street the moment they became sick, ensuring the company wouldn't have to pay for their inevitable funeral. Crucially, the industry knew a safer alternative existed. Red phosphorus, discovered in the 1840s, was stable and non-toxic. However, it was more expensive to produce than the deadly white variety. For decades, manufacturers made a calculated choice. The health of their workers was worth less than the profit margin on a box of matches. They continued to use the poison simply because it was cheap, ignoring the horrific toll it took on human life. The horrors could not be suppressed forever. In 1888, the match girls' strike in London brought the issue to the world stage. While the strike was sparked by unfair fines and low pay, it drew public attention to the gruesome reality of Phossy Jaw. Activists and journalists began to circulate descriptions and photographs of the victims. The public was horrified to learn that their household convenience came at the cost of young women's faces. In 1891, the Salvation Army launched a direct assault on the industry by opening their own factory. They produced darkest England matches using only safe red phosphorus and paid their workers fair wages. They proved that safety matches were commercially viable. Consumers were urged to check their boxes and boycott the toxic white phosphorus brands. It was one of the first examples of ethical consumerism, where buying the right product literally saved lives. Despite the success of the safety match, it took years for legislation to catch up. The lobbying power of the big phosphorus firms was immense. It wasn't until 1906 that an international convention in Bern finally banned the manufacture of white phosphorus matches in Europe. The United States followed later, placing a punitive tax on white phosphorus matches in 1913 that effectively taxed the disease out of existence. The era of the glowing jaw finally ended. Phossy Jaw stands as a grim monument to industrial negligence. It reminds us that workplace safety regulations were written in blood. The victims were not soldiers or explorers. They were impoverished girls making a product we used to light our stoves. Their suffering forced the world to acknowledge that a worker's health is not a commodity to be traded for cheaper goods. They lost their faces so that future generations could work without fear. Next time you strike a match, look for the red tip. That red color is not just a design choice, it is a legacy of the red phosphorus that ended the nightmare of Phossy Jaw. It represents a victory over greed and a beacon of safety. We want to hear from you. What other common household items do you suspect hide a dark or dangerous history? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and we might investigate your suggestion in our next documentary. Now that you know the real story, you'll never look at this the same way again. But there is always more to discover. Subscribe and ring the bell to keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.